Soul, SOL, on a sunny day. On a sunny day. Today was a sunny day. All the snow has melted. In this place, a lot of mud. But it's hard to feel, or it's harder to feel down on a sunny day. There's a reason why a gloomy day is called a gloomy day, and we all know what it means. And we know that it means it's not a sunny day. So in some sense, you're a fool if pragmatically, you don't worship the sun. In some sense. If you're a person who thinks of God all the time, then you may well simply thank God for the sunlight, knowing that the sunlight is not God, but one of the manifestations of God, and as it so happens, in this world, a pretty darn important one. I thought I'd start with the conclusion, talking about Akhenaten and the Aten, the disk, not the sun disk. The Aten Ra is the sun disk. The Aten Ya maybe could be called the moon disk. But the Aten is the disk. But is it a disk or is it a sphere? Recently, I guess, I wouldn't say discovered, but recently I've come to notice that it seems the only two-dimensional planes that exist are hemispheric planes. Such that a globe or a sphere has a definite hemisphere. It seems as though spheres as we know them have definite hemispheres. And definite or more or less definite rotational poles, lines perpendicular to the hemisphere. The great circle between North and South Pole on a sphere. It seems as though spheres have that. In the natural world, at our scale, I thought I'd start with the conclusion, talking about Akhenaten, the 18th dynasty Egyptian pharaoh. The iconographic historical figure who Freud, yes, the famous Sigmund Freud, was convinced was Moses. Not only Freud, but Bobby Hemmett. And I'm more inclined to believe Bobby Hemmett, but because of convention, I'm more inclined to mention Sigmund Freud. And it's funny that we often pit Sigmund Freud against Carl Jung. I mean, there's a certain distinction, right? We could call it materialist versus noumenalist, or nominalist, noumenalist. We could call it that. And we would expect that type of thing from Jung. It fits so snugly. And interestingly enough, like, that's the bridge. That's the bridge. So Sigmund Freud, right? And he never went off the deep end. He didn't make this his personal mission. He was just like, yeah, Moses and Akhenaten, same dude. That's what Bobby Hemmett said too. Very convincingly. But for me, it's what rang true when, after just having been culturally, over time, especially on the interweb, exposed to a little Akhenaten here, a little Akhenaten there over the last 20 years, back before YouTube was a thing, back when YouTube was separate from Google Video and YouTube only had 10-minute videos, and Google used to be Google Video. That's where all the, back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, 2003, 2005, I think, thereabouts. Google Video, man. That's where all the awesome videos were. Shit you can't even find now, man. Back before there were ads on YouTube, all that. Like, there were playlists would just play automatically. Like, it was much more intuitive. There weren't any ads. It was really sweet. But yeah, and there was a lot of stuff back then. There's a lot less than there was. There was no Khan Academy to speak of, you know. There weren't like mobile apps and stuff like that, but there was also a lot of good shit that ain't out there anymore. It's gone. Either by censorship or by self-censorship. But anyway, I don't even know where I was going with that. I'm going to start at the conclusion that St. Peter's Square at the Vatican City, Vatican, the famous city-state, of which I guess there are 3 in the Western world, DC and the quote-unquote city of London. It's the other 2. But yeah, the open air, St. Peter's Square. Open air, St. Peter's Square. And the obelisk in the middle. So what I'm saying is that if I do my job at the end of this video, or at the end of this series of videos, because I was hoping to already have gotten to the point by now, the first one I posted, Sol 1, SOL space ONE. I was hoping to already get to it. Now I'm not even sure if I'm going to get to it by the end of this one, but anyway, St. Peter's Square. I believe it was more or less, you know, it was the rebuilding of you know, St. Peter's Cathedral and like the square and all that. Like, it stretches before Raphael. I forget the name of the guy who was the architect before Raphael. I think somehow he and Raphael had had some other prior connection. But anyway, then the papal architect was Raphael, then Michelangelo, then some other guy, Domenico so and so, Franco, Flamenco, something. I think it's with an F. Domenico so and so. But we're not meant to remember that Domenico fellow, even though he was a pretty awesome architect. But everybody knows Raphael. Everybody knows Michelangelo. Then there's this Domenico dude, and then Bernini, right? So we know Raphael, Michelangelo, space, Bernini. Raphael, Michelangelo, Bernini. We know all them, right? Well, there was Raphael and Michelangelo, and then after Michelangelo, when that obelisk was constructed in St. Peter's Square, I'm not even sure if this Domenico dude was the official papal architect. I think there was like a gap where there was no papal architect because they say that Bernini is Michelangelo's successor. But there was like a huge gap in time between when Michelangelo stopped being the architect to when Bernini started. And that is the time period when this Domenico, I think it's Domenico, this Domenico dude, he wrote a book about raising the obelisk, right? And it was an obelisk that Caligula had constructed elsewhere. And anyway, it had originally come from Egypt, and then Caligula had constructed it elsewhere, and then they brought it to Rome. And when this Domenico dude or whatever was raising it, like there was a order of silence upon, like there was a death sentence if you talked, if you spoke at all while the obelisk was being moved, because it was supposedly like this authentic Egyptian obelisk from Egypt. So they wanted to get it up in one piece, right? But yet it's in several pieces because they added a base to it and they added like this fixture on top. Why did they do that? This is super important. And supposedly, yeah, like the ropes were about to break, and like some dude risked his life by screaming like, throw water on the ropes, because the ropes were all like dry and about to break as they were trying to lift this obelisk upright. And so like they threw water on the ropes to make him stronger or whatever. And this, they didn't kill the guy who said it, but like, there was a death order if you talked at all, because everybody was supposed to be concentrating so hard because it was so important. Why? And that's one of those things where you'd be like, that's iconography, that's idolatry. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, as it so happened, somebody talked and nobody died, and he probably wasn't the only one who talked. Probably other people did too, but it was to stress the importance of this artifact. So the artifact is super important, yet the guy who lifted it up, I mean, it's in the middle of a sun temple. In the middle of the Vatican, arguably pound for pound, that nation is still the most powerful nation. It's still more powerful than DC and still more powerful than the city of London, just barely. But it still is. Pound for pound, density, for per acreage of a nation, pound for pound, it's still the most powerful city-state nation in the world. Why? Because it preserves that image. Why? It's an obelisk that supposedly they don't know where it comes from. That's bullshit. There's nothing on the obelisk. It's a blank obelisk from Egypt. Blank. No hieroglyphs. Nothing. All Egyptians carved the shit out of everything. Everything had a message. Everything had a story. There was only one. There was only one philosophy. There was only one instance in Egyptian history where less is more and nothing is the most. And that was the Akhenaten Nefertiti legacy, which seemed a heresy and seemed to fail, but it didn't. And they're often accredited within maybe within certain thought, as either the inventor or the co-inventor of monotheism. And then depending on, quote unquote, which side of the aisle you're on, whatever accolades or criticisms you'll give, and it's all horseshit. Because without a doubt, Akhenaten and Moses, as Freud said, are the same guy. It's the same thing. It's the same story. Both are partially fabrications, but they line up. Why is the obelisk empty? Why are there no hieroglyphs on the obelisk? You don't have to study Egyptology very long to understand that that which is not inscribed is of the Aten. It is of what essentially Akhenaten, Moses, was trying to do. And for that matter, did. Because Aten inspired Adonis, right? In the same way like Judah, Judas, Judah, Yudah, Yah, Ta, or Ptah, Yah Ptah, or Jah Ptah. They put that empty obelisk in the center of St. Peter's because Akhenaten and Moses were the same phenomenon. The quote-unquote 17 years of our mana, including the drawing up to and the leading away from. That is the 40 years in the desert. 17 being significant because that was the raising of a generation under a different symbolic hegemony. They shifted the symbolic hegemony and subjected a generation to it fully, with trailers into it who were partially exposed to it later in life, and trailers out of it who were exposed early, enough to affect the generations. And it exploded in every direction, and one of the directions was Judaism. Perhaps the strongest. One of the reasons why the Jews are like, because we look at, and this is said with much respect. It's the same way like I briefly worked on a bridge crew, and I realized when I did it, for a couple summers, whatever, I'm not that guy. And, not all some blue collar jobs are like white collar jobs compared to what basically like pavers, guys who pave roads and guys who build bridges. There's nobody fucking tougher, man. I mean, there's nobody fucking tougher. Those are the toughest motherfuckers on the planet. And if they do both, forget about it. And not only that, but flaggers. Flagging, if you've never flagged for a day, like a 13-hour day, 11-hour day of flagging, it will make you want to understand eternity better. Whew, I got off track. But I guess that goes back to the pragmaticism of the sun. When you're cold and that warmth of the sun on your skin, it feels good. It's 30 degrees, but that sun is bright and thank you. We're not reptiles, but we still benefit from what they benefit from. We have multiple backup systems, but ain't nothing like, ain't nothing better than the real thing straight off the tap. So that symbol of the sun, in one sense it's pragmatic, and certainly the Akhenaten Revolution was about pragmatism. The quickness of construction of the mud brick enclosures in the open air Sun Temple. St. Peter's Square is the open air Sun Temple of Akhenaten, of Moses, from the house of Amosis, son of Amos. Amenhotep. There's so many gods, it's hard to figure out who's on top. And that's what Akhenaten was seeking to clarify. Because even though I guess you could say logically or symbolically or esoterically, there is several well-defined hierarchies and systems of relation of the gods and how they relate to psychological and even mathematical geometric truths. And if not truths, at least poetically inspired interpretations. Both. And more than that. They put that there to commemorate Akhenaten as Moses and Moses as Akhenaten. And that should be clear to anybody who studies the Bible and Egypt for just a little while. Now, why was it Domenico and not Raphael or Michelangelo or Bernini who put that up? Because they had to put the pediment at the bottom and the structure at the top in order to reach the 135. Because outward from the base of that unit, the great diameter is 144. And that ratio of 135 to 144 or 144 to 135 represents the rounded equivalent of 2 root 2 over 3. 2 root 2 over 3 is one of the most important ratios in the basics of the most elementary of three-dimensional geometry. 2 root 2 over 3. The square root of 8. Or the, 8 over 9. Or the square root quantity 8 over 9, close bracket.